I'm Mela Webb, a 32-year-old law graduate from one of the most esteemed universities in our state. While I'm a lawyer by training, I find solace in the quiet corners of my apartment, indulging in my favorite hobbies like diving into novels or losing myself in the drama of my beloved telenovelas. My career as a business attorney was a point of pride for me until a few years ago. Unfortunately, it came to an abrupt end due to a distressing incident involving an associate under investigation for money laundering. Losing my job was a blow, but fate had its way of weaving unexpected connections. It was during this tumultuous time that I crossed paths with Calvin, my now husband. I was introduced to him on a double date, orchestrated by a friend. Calvin, a land surveyor with his own real estate agency, entered my life like a breath of fresh air. Despite my introverted nature, I found myself drawn to his sincerity and intellect. Our first meeting was enchanting, to say the least. As my friend engaged in conversation with her partner, Calvin and I connected effortlessly. It was as if we had stumbled upon the missing piece of each other's lives. Loneliness may have nudged me towards him, but it was our shared connection that sealed our fate. After exchanging contact information, Calvin and I embarked on a journey of discovery through online conversations. Each exchange deepened our bond, paving the way for our first official date. Unbeknownst to me, Calvin had arranged for us to dine at a restaurant owned by one of his friends. Our lunch date was nothing short of magical. Calvin's genuine demeanor and thoughtful conversation swept me off my feet. In his company, I felt understood and cherished in a way I had never experienced before. It was evident that our connection was something special, something worth nurturing. In the weeks that followed, our relationship blossomed. Despite the challenges we faced, including the remnants of my past career setback, Calvin stood by my side unwaveringly. With his love and support, I found the courage to embrace a new chapter in my life, one filled with hope and possibility. Looking back, I realized that every twist and turn, every setback and triumph led me to Calvin. He is my partner, my confidant, and my greatest love. And as we journey through life together, I am grateful for the serendipitous moment that brought us together, forever changing the course of our lives. After Calvin and I met that second time, we started seeing each other more. We would go out together and have picnics, slowly getting to know each other better. It felt like we were moving towards being in a real relationship. One day, Calvin asked me to come to his office for a chat. During our conversation, he found out about how I lost my previous job. He had an idea to help me. He wanted to introduce me to his friend, Charles, who was a big deal at a bank. He was the managing director there. Calvin and Charles had been friends since they were in school. I went for an interview with Charles, and it seemed to go really well. Maybe it helped that he was good friends with Calvin, but I'd like to think my skills and answers impressed him too. Charles decided to hire me. He offered me a job as a manager at one of the bank's branches, and I've been working there for about 3 to 4 years now. On my first day, I wanted to make a great impression, so I chose to wear one of my best outfits, a blue skirt and jacket set with a white shirt. Work was supposed to start at 8 a.m. and end at 6 p.m. I arrived super early, around 7:30 a.m., to show how eager I was. When I got to the bank, the receptionist was just getting ready for the day. She asked me to wait in the visitors' lounge. This place was set aside especially for visitors of the managing director, like a waiting area but a bit more private. It was away from the busier parts of the office, so it felt a bit isolated. I ended up waiting there for a long time, about an hour and 45 minutes before I was called in. Starting a new job was a big step for me, especially after everything that had happened with my last job. But it felt like a fresh start, and I was ready to make the most of this new opportunity. I was getting tired, but I didn't make any complaints because I knew this was a big change for me. The receptionist came to apologize and informed me that the managing director was around. I was then directed to the Charles office by the RE receptionist. I knocked, and a voice told me to come in. We exchanged pleasantries, and then Charles introduced me to his colleague, and I realised he was going to be a co-worker of mine. He was told to take me around the premises, introduce me to the basics and details of the job. He was also to take me through my job order at the office, and at the same time introduce me to other staff at work. So basically, all he was to do was to take me on a tour around the premises so as to get familiar with the work. Environment, he told me his name was Morris, and Charles informed him that I was going to be working with them from that day as a co-manager in order to reduce his workload and ease him off stress. I put two and two together and realised Morris also had a high position at the bank. I left Charles's office and Morris smiled at me. He told me it was a pleasure having me here. I was glad and happy as he seemed like the gentleman he was. He took me around the premises, showed me the most important spaces and rooms for me to know, starting from the counter to the customer service room, and then the restrooms and so on. After this, a meeting was held with the other staff where I was introduced as a manager to my colleagues, and they all welcomed me in a warm fashion. Immediately after the meeting was concluded, I was taken to my new office, where my job nature was explained to me vividly. For me to understand, Morris also said if I had any unclarity and questions, I shouldn't hesitate to come to him, as he smiled and left the office. The day went by with me, having to do too little and so little of work on my first day. After the close of the day at work, which was 6 o'clock, I left the office and returned home. Morris Walsh was a tall, fine young man with a cute smile, well-dressed, and he smelled nice. Apparently, he was a graduate of financial technology, which explained his position at the bank. On my first day at work, I was 29 years old. Morris, who was a year older, greeted me. The next day, I arrived a little before 8 a.m., and Morris arrived at the same time. We chatted about our backgrounds and found out that we went to the same school and graduated in the same year. This made us feel closer and gave us something to bond over. After exchanging numbers, we went to our respective offices to start our day. Lunchtime rolled around, starting at 1 p.m. and ending at 2 p.m. About 15 minutes before lunch, Morris called me, surprising me. Instead of talking about work, he invited me to lunch at his favourite spot nearby. He described it as a great place for fast food and snacks, and I agreed to join him. We left the office together and walked to the snack bar. Along the way, we talked and got to know each other better. The spot Morris chose was cosy, and the food was delicious. During lunch, we shared more about ourselves, our interests, hobbies, and even our dislikes. I enjoyed our conversation and felt comfortable opening up to Morris. After that first lunch together, it became a daily routine. Morris and I would leave work together and enjoy our meal at the snack bar. It was nice having someone to talk to during lunch breaks, and I found Morris to be a trustworthy friend. By the time lunch was over at 2 p.m., I felt refreshed and ready to tackle the rest of the day. Lunch with Morris had become something I looked forward to, a bright spot in my workday where I could relax and enjoy good company. As days went by, Morris and I grew closer. We shared more about our lives, our dreams, and our goals. He became someone I could confide in, and I valued his friendship greatly. Our lunchtime outings not only filled our stomachs, but also enriched our bond. Looking back, those lunch breaks with Morris were some of the best parts of my workdays. They brought joy and companionship into my routine, making the challenges of work easier to handle. I'm grateful for the friendship that blossomed between us and the memories we created together during those lunchtime adventures. After a long day at work, Morris and I left the office together. We exchanged friendly goodbyes before heading to our respective offices. Work typically ended at 6 p.m., and that day was no exception. As I left for home, I reminisced about the blossoming relationship between Calvin and me. Though we hadn't tied the knot yet, our connection was strong, and he was well aware of my growing friendship with Morris. The pivotal moment leading to our marriage unfolded on a serene weekend, about 4 or 5 months into my new job. Calvin and I decided to spend quality time together, opting for a leisurely picnic at a charming park. As we lounged on the picnic blanket, enjoying each other's company, the atmosphere was light and filled with laughter. We indulged in casual banter, shared jokes, and revelled in the joy of simply being together. However, nature called, and I excused myself to use the restroom. Little did I know, Calvin had something special planned during my brief absence. Upon my return, I was greeted with an unexpected surprise, a beautifully wrapped box that hadn't been there before. Calvin, wearing a mischievous grin, revealed that he had arranged for its delivery in advance of my restroom break. Eagerly, I unwrapped the package, expecting to find a necklace or perhaps a bracelet inside. To my astonishment, nestled within the box was a dazzling ring, its radiance reflecting the depth of Calvin's affection. Stunned, I looked up to find Calvin down on one knee, a look of earnest sincerity in his eyes. In a heartwarming display of love, he poured out his feelings, culminating in a heartfelt proposal for marriage. The surreal moment hung in the air, the sounds of the park fading into the background as Calvin's words enveloped me. Overwhelmed with emotion, I could feel tears of joy welling up as I nodded fervently, unable to contain my happiness. It was a scene straight out of a fairy tale, a picturesque moment etched forever in the annals of our love story. Without a moment's hesitation, I accepted Calvin's proposal, my heart overflowing with love and gratitude. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, sealing our commitment with a tender embrace, I knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter in our lives, filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities. True to our shared enthusiasm, we wasted no time in planning our wedding. Within a month, surrounded by family and friends, we exchanged vows and embarked on the journey of marriage. It was a joyous occasion, marked by laughter, tears, and the promise of a future filled with love and companionship. As husband and wife, Calvin and I embarked on a new adventure, blending our lives together and creating cherished memories along the way. Our bond grew stronger with each passing day, a testament to the enduring power of love and the beauty of shared dreams. However, just as our love story reached new heights, tragedy struck, casting a shadow over our happiness. One fateful day, I received a distressing call from Calvin's workplace, informing me of a sudden emergency. My heart raced with fear as I rushed to his side, the weight of uncertainty pressing down upon me. In my haste, I reached out to Morris, seeking solace and support in the face of adversity. Despite the turmoil that lay ahead, I found comfort in the unwavering friendship that had blossomed between us. Together, we navigated the stormy waters, drawing strength from each other's presence and unwavering support. As I reflect on the tumultuous journey that brought us together, I am reminded of the profound resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of love. Though the road ahead may be fraught with challenges, I am certain that with faith, hope, and the enduring bond of friendship, we will emerge stronger and more united than ever before. When I received the call about Calvin's health, my heart sank. It was Morris who suggested driving me to the hospital, sensing my distress. Grateful for his support, I agreed, and we made our way to the hospital together. Throughout the journey, my mind raced with worry, imagining the worst-case scenarios. Upon arrival, the receptionist directed me to Calvin's room, while Morris waited in the waiting area. As I entered the room, the sight of Calvin lying in the hospital bed, connected to various monitors and IV drips, was overwhelming. Seeing him like that, so vulnerable and unwell, brought tears to my eyes. I felt a surge of emotions, fear, concern, and a deep sense of helplessness. After composing myself, I approached Calvin's bedside. He appeared to be sleeping peacefully, unaware of my presence. Gently, I reached out to hold his hand, offering whatever comfort I could. In that moment, I wished I could take away his pain and make everything okay again. Shortly after, the doctor arrived to discuss Calvin's condition with me. We stepped outside the room to have some privacy. The doctor explained that Calvin had collapsed due to a critical kidney infection, which had also led to a severe blood infection. My heart sank further upon hearing the seriousness of his condition. The doctor assured me that they were doing everything they could to stabilize him, but it was clear that Calvin's situation was grave. Despite the doctor's reassurances, I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that gripped me. Questions swirled in my mind. How had this happened? Why hadn't Calvin sought medical help sooner? Guilt gnawed at me as I wondered if I could have done more to encourage him to prioritize his health. As the day wore on, I remained by Calvin's side, anxiously awaiting any updates on his condition. Morris stayed with me for a while before eventually heading home. Alone in the hospital room, I felt a sense of isolation and vulnerability. The beeping of the machines and the sterile smell of the hospital filled the air, serving as constant reminders of the gravity of the situation. Despite my exhaustion, I couldn't bring myself to leave Calvin's side. Every passing minute felt like an eternity as I prayed fervently for his recovery. The uncertainty weighed heavily on me, and I found solace only in the faint hope that Calvin would pull through this ordeal and emerge stronger than before. The doctor assured me that the hospital would provide the best treatment possible for Calvin to ensure his speedy recovery. They prescribed injections and medication, and I returned to Calvin's room to find him awake. We shared a moment of relief that neither of us had known about his condition before. I stayed by his side throughout the day, offering comfort and support. A week later, I reluctantly returned to work, even though Calvin was still hospitalized. He insisted that I shouldn't stay away for too long, expressing his determination to recover soon. However, as the weeks passed and Calvin's condition showed little improvement, the weight of worry and emotional strain began to take its toll on me. One Wednesday during a lunch break with Morris, he asked about Calvin's welfare. Feeling overwhelmed, I confided in him about the pressure and loneliness I was experiencing. Morris suggested going out for dinner at a nearby bar to help me relax and unwind. Gratefully, I declined, explaining that I needed to be with my husband during this critical time. However, as the days went by, the pressure mounted, and the emotional strain became unbearable. Feeling desperate for companionship and solace, I called Morris one evening, asking if he was available for dinner. Unbeknownst to me, this decision would mark a turning point in my life. That night, we met at the restaurant Morris had chosen. Over dinner and drinks, our conversation took a more intimate turn. In the haze of alcohol, Morris confessed his feelings for me, admitting that he had been attracted to me before I got married. In a moment of vulnerability, I found myself reciprocating his sentiment, acknowledging that things might have been different if I hadn't met Calvin when I did. Regretting my words almost immediately, I realized the gravity of the situation. Both of us were under the influence of alcohol, and our emotions had clouded our judgment. Morris kindly escorted me home, but the weight of what had transpired hung heavily in the air. As I entered my home, I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt and uncertainty. I had crossed a line that should never have been crossed, jeopardizing not only my marriage but also my friendship with Morris. Little did I know, this moment of weakness would set off a chain of events that would test the very foundations of my love life. As I woke up the next day, groggy from the previous night's drinks, I found myself beside Morris. Panic surged through me as the realization of what had happened hit me like a ton of bricks. It was my first time being unfaithful to Calvin, a mistake born out of a moment of weakness. Feeling a mix of shock and regret, I gently woke Morris, who seemed just as bewildered as I was. Though there were feelings between us, we both knew that what had transpired was a grave error. Despite any temporary satisfaction, the affair was a mistake that neither of us could justify. As Morris hurriedly dressed and left, I was left grappling with a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Despite the guilt, there was an undeniable allure to the forbidden encounter. My body craved more, even as my mind reeled from the consequences of my actions. Weeks passed, and despite Calvin's recovery and return to work, the affair with Morris remained unresolved. Our interactions at work became strained, and the easy camaraderie we once shared vanished. I longed for closure, yet I couldn't shake the desire for the affair to continue, even if it meant risking my marriage. One day, I summoned Morris to my office under the guise of seeking closure and discussing what had happened between us. However, deep down, I harbored ulterior motives. As Morris sat across from me, I couldn't suppress the urge to seduce him into wanting the affair to continue. Standing up from my desk, I moved closer to Morris, my heart pounding with anticipation. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw a mixture of concern and resolve. He confessed that he had been distant because he didn't want our mistake to jeopardize my marriage. His words struck a chord within me, awakening a sense of clarity amidst the chaos of my emotions. I realized that I couldn't continue down this path of deceit and betrayal. With a heavy heart, I stepped back, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. In that moment, I made a choice to prioritize my marriage and the love I shared with Calvin over the temporary gratification of an illicit affair. It was a difficult decision, but one that I knew was necessary for the sake of my happiness and integrity. I sat on Morris's legs, urging him not to label our actions as a mistake. I pressed myself against him, and he tried to resist, but eventually he reciprocated my advances. As things escalated, the door suddenly swung open without warning. It was Calvin, my husband, who had come to surprise me with a romantic dinner on the eve of our anniversary. Calvin's expression turned from excitement to shock and disappointment as he caught us in such a compromising situation. He had intended to make the evening special for me, only to find me with Morris in an intimate embrace. I felt immediate regret and tried to apologize, but Calvin was too hurt to listen. He left without a word, and Morris followed suit, understanding the gravity of the situation. When I returned home that night, Calvin and I argued intensely. He demanded to know when the affair had started, unable to comprehend how I could betray him in such a way. I attempted to explain that it was a moment of weakness exacerbated by the stress of his illness, but Calvin was unforgiving. He declared that our marriage was over, and I was relegated to sleeping on the couch that night. The next morning, Calvin instructed me to leave his house with all my belongings. With no other option, I sought refuge at a friend's apartment, where I've been staying since. However, the consequences of my actions extended beyond my personal life. I lost my job as a result of the affair, a devastating blow that compounded my already dire situation. Attempts to reconcile with Morris were met with similar rejection. He blamed me for his job loss and refused to forgive me, severing all ties with me. As days passed, divorce papers arrived, marking the official end of my marriage. I found myself defenseless in the face of the dissolution of a relationship I had once held dear. Reflecting on my downfall, I realized the profound lessons it imparted. I learned that a mistake, no matter how enticing in the moment, carries lasting repercussions. It taught me to cherish and protect the love and stability I once had, cautioning against the temptation of straying from the path of fidelity and commitment. Thus, I found myself at the age of 32, alone, homeless and unemployed, a cautionary tale of the consequences of succumbing to temptation.